Sometimes, the most important person in your life arrives through a mistake you almost ignored. The ringtone shattered the silence inside Emily Carter's aging Honda as rain tapped softly against the windshield. She glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. Another long day was finally over. The diner's neon sign still glowed behind her, washing the empty parking lot in faded red light, but Emily was too exhausted to notice. Her waitress apron lay crumpled on the passenger seat beside a stack of overdue bills. The gas gauge hovered just above empty. Her feet ached. Her shoulders felt heavy. And all she wanted was to get home to her 5-year-old son. Then her phone rang again. Unknown number. Emily frowned. Her son had been running a fever all evening. The pediatric clinic had promised to call if there were any updates from the after-hours nurse. She grabbed the phone before the call could end. "Hello," she answered quickly. There was a pause. Then a deep male voice replied. "Michael." Emily blinked. "No, I think you have the wrong number." Silence followed for a second. "I'm sorry," the man said. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that sounded naturally confident without trying. "Apparently I do." Emily managed a tired smile despite herself. "It happens. I suppose it does." Another brief silence lingered. Normally, that would have been the end of it. A polite apology. A disconnected call. Two strangers continuing their separate lives. But before either of them hung up, a sound filled the car. A small cough crackled through Emily's phone speaker, followed by another. Her smile disappeared instantly. "Ethan," she whispered. A baby monitor app glowed on her screen. The sound had come from her son's bedroom back at the apartment. The man on the line heard it too. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Emily rubbed her eyes. "My son's sick." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She hated sounding vulnerable, hated admitting how hard things were. The man didn't respond immediately. "That's rough," he said finally. "How old is he?" Emily stared through the rain-speckled windshield. 5. That's a tough age to be sick. Something about the way he said it felt genuine. Not forced. Not polite. Genuine. "Yeah," Emily said softly. "It is." Another cough crackled through the monitor. Her stomach tightened. Every fever made her nervous. Every late-night cough pulled her mind toward worst-case scenarios. Parenting alone had taught her that fear rarely took a day off. "Is he going to be okay?" the stranger asked. Emily looked down at the steering wheel. The question hit harder than she expected. Nobody had asked her that all week. Not her landlord. Not the customers who left pennies as tips. Not the manager who cut her hours. Not even her ex-husband, who had disappeared 3 years ago and never looked back. "I hope so," she admitted quietly. The man exhaled slowly. "For what it's worth, I think kids are stronger than we give them credit for." Emily laughed softly. The sound surprised even her. "You sound very sure about that." "I'm not." A faint chuckle followed. "But confidence sounds better than panic." For the first time all day, Emily felt her shoulders relax. Just a little. Rain continued falling outside. Cars passed occasionally on the distant road beyond the parking lot. The world seemed strangely still. "Well," she said, glancing at the clock. "Whoever Michael is, I hope you find him. And I hope your son feels better." Another pause. Neither of them hung up. Emily found that oddly comforting. Then finally the man spoke again. "Good night, Emily." Her eyebrows lifted. "I never told you my name." "You answered the phone with it." Emily thought back. She had, without realizing it. Exhaustion made people careless. "Right. Good night, Emily." "Good night, whoever you are." A brief laugh escaped the stranger. "Alexander." "Good night, Alexander." The call ended. Emily stared at the dark screen for a moment. Then she placed the phone on the passenger seat and started the engine. Across the city, nearly 30 miles away, Alexander Reed stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse overlooking thousands of lights. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. Awards lined the shelves behind him. Success surrounded him from every angle. Yet somehow the quiet felt louder than ever. His phone remained in his hand. He looked at the disconnected call. Emily Carter. Wrong number. He should have forgotten about it already. Instead, he found himself wondering whether the little boy's fever had gone down. Wondering whether the tired woman in the rain had made it home safely. And for reasons he couldn't explain, as midnight approached, Alexander realized something unusual had happened. For the first time in a very long time, he was thinking about someone other than himself. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in Emily Carter's apartment when she finally pushed open the front door a little after midnight. The moment she stepped inside, she kicked off her worn work shoes and moved straight toward Ethan's bedroom. The small apartment smelled faintly of children's cough syrup and laundry detergent. A single lamp glowed in the hallway, casting warm light across the faded carpet. Emily paused at the doorway and looked in. Ethan was asleep beneath a dinosaur blanket, his blonde hair scattered across the pillow. His cheeks were still slightly flushed from the fever, but his breathing sounded easier now. She released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The digital thermometer on the nightstand displayed 99.8 degrees. Better than before. Much better. Emily carefully adjusted the blanket around him and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Good job, buddy," she whispered. "Keep fighting." Ethan stirred slightly, but did not wake. Emily remained there for a few moments, simply watching him. Being a single mother had taught her that peace never lasted long. Whenever life felt stable, another bill arrived. Another expense appeared. Another unexpected problem demanded attention. But right now, for this brief moment, her son was sleeping comfortably, and that felt like enough. She quietly left the room and settled onto the couch. Her body immediately sank into the cushions. Every muscle ached from carrying trays and standing for 10-hour shifts. She glanced at her phone. No new messages. No missed calls. The screen reflected her tired face back at her. Then, unexpectedly, her thoughts drifted toward the stranger from earlier. Alexander. She did not even know his last name. She did not know what he looked like. She did not know where he lived or what he did for a living. Yet something about the conversation lingered in her mind. Perhaps it was because he had listened. Or perhaps it was because he had asked a question nobody else had bothered to ask. Is he going to be okay? Emily shook her head and laughed softly at herself. It was ridiculous. He was a stranger. A wrong number. Nothing more. Across the city, Alexander Reed sat alone at a massive dining table that could easily seat 20 people. The meal prepared by his private chef remained untouched. Through the towering windows of his penthouse, downtown Chicago sparkled beneath the night sky. Most people would have envied his view. Most people would have envied his life. Yet Alexander barely noticed either. His attention remained fixed on the phone resting beside his plate. He checked the time. 12:34 in the morning. Then he looked away. A few seconds later, he looked back again. Irritated with himself, he stood and walked toward the windows. The board meeting scheduled for tomorrow involved a merger worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His executive team expected final approval by noon. Investors were waiting. Lawyers were waiting. Entire departments were waiting. Yet somehow his mind kept returning to a small apartment somewhere in the city and a little boy with a fever. It made no sense. Alexander had spent years training himself to focus on numbers, contracts, and strategy. Feelings complicated things. Attachments complicated things. He had learned that lesson long ago. His phone buzzed suddenly. Alexander glanced down. For a split second, his heart jumped. But it was only an email from his chief financial officer. He frowned and set the phone aside. The next morning arrived with gray clouds hanging low over the city. Emily barely slept 4 hours before her alarm sounded. The day began exactly as most days did. Packing Ethan's lunch. Searching for matching socks. Convincing a stubborn 5-year-old that medicine was not poison. By 8 o'clock, she was dropping him off at kindergarten before rushing toward another shift. Life moved fast when every minute mattered. At the diner, customers flowed in nonstop. Coffee orders, pancakes, business lunches, endless refills. Emily worked through it all with practiced efficiency. Around noon, while carrying a tray toward booth 7, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She ignored it. Employees were not supposed to check phones during shifts. A few minutes later, it vibrated again. Then again. During her break, she finally pulled it out. An unknown number appeared on the screen. The same number from last night. Emily stared at it for several seconds. Before she could decide whether to call back, a new text message appeared. It read, "Hello, Emily. This is Alexander. I hope Ethan is feeling better today." For reasons she could not explain, a smile slowly appeared on her face. Emily stared at the text message for nearly 10 seconds before realizing she was smiling at her phone in the middle of the diner kitchen. Around her, dishes clattered, coffee machines hissed, and waitresses hurried between tables carrying trays balanced on tired shoulders. Yet for a brief moment, all of that seemed to fade into the background. "Hello, Emily. This is Alexander. I hope Ethan is feeling better today. Such a simple message. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. But somehow it felt different. Thoughtful. Personal. Emily quickly typed a response before she could overthink it. Thank you. His fever is lower today. He even argued with me about eating vegetables this morning. She hit send and immediately returned to work. A minute later, her phone vibrated again. That sounds promising. Healthy children are supposed to argue about vegetables. Emily laughed softly. A customer glanced at her from booth 12. She apologized and tucked the phone away. Throughout the rest of her shift, a strange feeling lingered. Anticipation. Every time her phone vibrated, she found herself wondering whether it was Alexander. By the time her shift ended that evening, the sky had already turned dark. A cold breeze swept through the parking lot as she loaded herself into the Honda and started the engine. The check engine light flashed briefly before disappearing. Again, another problem waiting for another paycheck. As she drove home, her phone chimed. Another message. How is the patient doing tonight? Emily shook her head with amusement. Patient. She liked that. She replied while parked at a red light. The patient is currently demanding chicken nuggets and refusing medicine. Sounds like a strong recovery. That was when something unexpected happened. Instead of texting back, her phone rang. The same number. Emily hesitated only a second before answering. Hello. Good evening, Emily. His voice carried the same calm warmth she remembered. I figured texting was inefficient. She smiled despite herself. That sounds like something a businessman would say. Alexander chuckled. Perhaps. Emily pulled into her apartment parking lot, but did not get out of the car. So how was your day? He asked. Nobody had asked her that in years without wanting something in return. The question caught her off guard. Busy. Long. I spilled coffee on myself around noon. One customer complained because the pie was too warm. Too warm. That was my reaction too. Alexander laughed. The sound was surprisingly genuine. Not forced. Not polite. Genuine. For the next 20 minutes, they talked. About nothing important. Traffic. Weather. Ethan's obsession with dinosaurs. The terrible coffee sold at gas stations. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Easy in a way neither of them expected. Across the city, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse office overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. Several unread reports remained open on his desk. His assistant had emailed reminders all afternoon. A merger meeting awaited him tomorrow morning. Yet none of it seemed urgent right now. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he found himself enjoying a conversation that had nothing to do with business. Can I ask you something? Emily said. Of course. What do you actually do? Alexander glanced toward the skyline. I work in technology. It was technically true. That sounds mysterious. It sounds boring. I doubt that. He smiled. And what about you? Emily leaned back in her seat. I survive. That is my current profession. Alexander fell silent. For a moment, there was humor in her voice, but he could hear the exhaustion underneath. The kind that came from carrying responsibilities alone for too long. That sounds harder than technology, he finally said. Emily looked out through the windshield toward the lit windows of her apartment building. Something tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Nobody ever acknowledged how hard it was. Most people simply expected her to keep going. Some days it is, she admitted quietly. A comfortable silence followed. Not awkward. Comfortable. The kind of silence that only appears when two people stop feeling like strangers. Finally, Emily checked the time. Almost 11. Ethan would be waiting. I should go. Of course. Neither moved to end the call immediately. Good night, Alexander. Good night, Emily. She ended the call and sat there for several seconds staring at the dark screen. Upstairs, Ethan was waiting. Bills were waiting. Life was waiting. Yet somehow everything felt a little lighter than it had 20 minutes earlier. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, Alexander remained seated beside the window long after the call ended. The city lights reflected across the glass. His phone rested quietly on the desk. Tomorrow would bring meetings, negotiations, investors, and decisions worth millions of dollars. But as he looked down at the call history, one thought crossed his mind. For the second night in a row, the best part of his day had been talking to a woman he had never met. Over the next 2 weeks, something neither Emily nor Alexander planned slowly became part of their lives. Every evening, sometime between 10:30 and 11, one of them would call. There was never a discussion about it. No agreement. No schedule. Yet somehow it happened anyway. The calls became as natural as sunrise and sunset. Emily noticed it first on a Thursday night. She was folding laundry at the kitchen table while Ethan colored dinosaurs beside her. Her eyes drifted toward the clock. 10:52. Without realizing it, she found herself listening for the phone. Waiting. A few minutes later it rang. Her heart lifted before she could stop it. "Good evening," Alexander said. "You sound unusually cheerful." Emily laughed. "You have developed a strange talent for hearing things through a phone." Occupational hazard. Technology? Technology. She smiled at the familiar answer. Some nights they talked for 10 minutes. Other nights it stretched beyond an hour. They discussed favorite movies, childhood memories, bad jobs, embarrassing moments. Alexander admitted he once accidentally sent an unfinished presentation to an entire board of directors. Emily laughed so hard she nearly dropped the phone. Emily confessed she once served decaf coffee to a customer who spent 20 minutes praising its strength. Alexander laughed until he could barely speak. Slowly, walls neither of them realized existed began to lower. One evening, while driving home from work, Emily listened as Alexander described growing up in a small town outside Chicago. "My father fixed air conditioners," he said. "My mother taught second grade." Emily smiled. "That explains a lot." "What does it explain?" "You do not sound like somebody who grew up rich." Alexander looked out the window of his penthouse. The city lights glittered below. "Maybe that is because I did not." It was true. Mostly. He simply left out the part about becoming one of the most successful technology executives in the country. Across town, Ethan had become aware of the mysterious nightly calls. At first he barely noticed. Then one night, he climbed onto the couch beside Emily while she was talking. "Who is that?" he whispered. Emily covered the phone. "A friend." Ethan considered this seriously. Then he nodded. "Tell your friend I like dinosaurs." Before Emily could stop him, Alexander's voice came through the speaker. "What kind of dinosaurs?" Ethan's eyes widened. "You heard me?" Alexander laughed. "I did." For the next 10 minutes, the conversation shifted entirely toward Tyrannosaurus rexes, Triceratops, and whether dinosaurs would enjoy pizza. When the call finally ended, Ethan grinned from ear to ear. "I like your friend." Emily smiled. "You do? He sounds nice." Later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, Emily found herself replaying the comment. "He sounds nice." Such a simple observation. Yet it captured exactly how she felt. Alexander was kind, consistent, easy to talk to. In a world filled with uncertainty, those qualities felt surprisingly rare. Meanwhile, Alexander found himself adjusting his schedule around the calls. Board meetings ended, investor dinners concluded, contracts were signed, and through it all one thought often remained in the back of his mind. 11 o'clock. His assistant noticed the change first. "You seem happier lately," she commented one afternoon. Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. "Happier? Less impossible to work with." He frowned. "I was not impossible." She gave him a look. "You once scheduled a meeting for 6:30 in the morning." Alexander could not argue with that. That evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows of his penthouse, his phone rang exactly at 10:59. "Emily." He answered immediately. "Hello. You picked up fast." "Coincidence." Emily laughed. "Liar." For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, familiar, dangerous in ways neither fully understood. Then Emily said quietly, "Do you ever feel like life gets so busy that you forget to look forward to anything?" Alexander sat down slowly. Her question struck closer than she realized. "Yes," he admitted. "I think a lot of people do." Emily stared through her apartment window toward the city lights beyond. "I was just thinking that lately. These conversations are kind of my favorite part of the day." The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Surprised silence. Across the city, Alexander felt something warm settle in his chest. A feeling he had not experienced in years. Finally he smiled. "Mine too, Emily." Neither of them realized it yet, but somewhere along the way, the wrong number had stopped feeling wrong at all. The first sign that something was changing came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Emily's car refused to start outside Ethan's kindergarten. She turned the key once, then twice. The engine answered with a weak click before falling silent again. Emily closed her eyes and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Around her, parents loaded children into warm vehicles and drove away. Within 15 minutes, The parking lot was nearly empty. Ethan sat quietly in the back seat, hugging a stuffed dinosaur. "Is the car sick?" he asked. Emily managed a smile. "Something like that." The truth was that she already knew what the problem was. The mechanic had warned her months ago. The battery was old. The alternator was struggling. Repairs would cost money she simply did not have. She glanced at her bank account on her phone. The balance made her stomach tighten. Rent was due in 8 days. Groceries needed to last another week. Every dollar already had a purpose. Her phone buzzed. "Alexander." "Right on schedule," even though it was only 6 in the evening. Emily answered. "Hello. You sound different," he said immediately. "Long day." Emily laughed softly. "How do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Knowing when something is wrong." Alexander leaned back in his office chair. A floor-to-ceiling window behind him overlooked downtown Chicago. Several executives were still waiting in the conference room next door, but he had stepped away after noticing the tension in her voice. "Because I listen." The simple answer caught her off guard. Emily stared through the windshield at the gray sky above the empty parking lot. Then she told him about the car. Not dramatically, not looking for help, just talking. The way people talk when they trust someone. Alexander listened quietly until she finished. "That sounds stressful." "That is a polite way of putting it." "How are you getting home?" "I will figure it out." That sounds suspiciously like a plan created by someone with no plan. Despite herself, Emily laughed. "Maybe." A warm silence followed. "You always say that," Alexander said. "Say what?" "I will figure it out." Emily looked down at her hands. They were rough from years of work. Years of carrying trays, cleaning tables, and doing whatever was necessary to keep moving forward. "Because I have to." Alexander did not answer immediately. For some reason, her words stayed with him long after the call ended. Later that evening, after Ethan was asleep and the city lights shimmered outside his penthouse windows, Alexander found himself thinking about Emily again. He thought about the apartment she had described, the old Honda, the careful budgeting, the way she carried every burden without complaint. Most people he encountered spent enormous amounts of energy trying to appear important. Emily spent hers trying to survive. That difference mattered more than he expected. Meanwhile, Emily sat at her small kitchen table reviewing bills. The lamp above her cast a soft circle of light across the paperwork. Rent, utilities, insurance. Numbers filled every page. Numbers never seemed to stop. Her phone vibrated with a new message. She smiled automatically, expecting Alexander. Instead, it was an email from the mechanic. Attached was an estimate for the repairs. Emily opened it. Her heart sank. $1,247. She stared at the screen in disbelief. It might as well have been $12 million. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, quieter, heavier. She rubbed her eyes and pushed the estimate aside. Tomorrow she would find another solution. Somehow she always did. Across the city, Alexander stood beside his window looking down at the endless sea of lights. His phone remained in his hand. For several minutes, he debated with himself. Then finally he opened a browser and searched for something he had never searched before. A local auto repair shop less than 3 miles from Emily's neighborhood. He studied the information carefully before closing the screen. A faint smile appeared on his face. He was not planning to rescue anyone. He knew Emily would never accept that. But for the first time, Alexander found himself wanting to make life a little easier for someone else. And that feeling was becoming harder to ignore. The next morning began with a surprise Emily could not explain. At 7:30, her phone rang while she was helping Ethan pour cereal into a bowl shaped like a rocket ship. The caller ID displayed the name of the auto repair shop. Emily answered immediately. "This is Emily Carter." "Good morning, Ms. Carter," the receptionist said cheerfully. "We are calling about your vehicle." Emily's stomach tightened. "Yes. Your repair order has been approved." Emily frowned. "Approved by who?" There was a brief pause. Papers shuffled in the background. "It appears an anonymous customer covered the cost." Emily froze. Across the kitchen, Ethan happily arranged blueberries into the shape of a dinosaur without noticing the sudden change in her expression. "I think there must be some mistake," Emily said. "The estimate was over $1,200. "No mistake," the receptionist replied. "Everything has been paid in full. Your vehicle will be ready this afternoon." The call ended a minute later, leaving Emily standing motionless beside the kitchen counter. She checked her email. The estimate was still there, $1,247. Then she looked at her bank account. Unchanged. Nobody in her family had that kind of money. Her closest friends were struggling almost as much as she was. None of it made sense. By lunchtime, she still had no answers. Throughout her shift at the diner, she replayed the conversation repeatedly in her head. Customers ordered sandwiches. Coffee cups filled and emptied. The afternoon rush came and went. Yet the mystery remained. Someone had helped her. Someone who expected nothing in return. That evening, after picking up her repaired car, Emily sat behind the wheel and listened to the smooth hum of the engine. It sounded healthier than it had in months. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt unsettled. Kindness this large was unfamiliar territory. At exactly 10:58 that night, her phone rang. Alexander. Emily answered immediately. You would not happen to know anything about auto repairs, would you? Alexander smiled despite himself. He was standing beside the window of his penthouse, watching city lights shimmer against the dark sky. I know enough to avoid doing them myself. Emily narrowed her eyes, even though he could not see her. Interesting answer. Interesting question. She hesitated. Somebody paid to fix my car. Alexander remained silent. Completely anonymous. Still silence. Emily listened carefully. Alexander. Yes. You sound suspicious. He laughed softly. I sound suspicious? Very. That is unfortunate. Emily shook her head. It was you, was not it? Alexander looked out at the skyline. He had anticipated this possibility. Would it matter? Emily fell quiet. The question lingered between them. Yes, she finally admitted. Why? Alexander leaned one shoulder against the glass. Because if it was me, you would feel obligated. Emily stared at the living room ceiling. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old pipes. I do not like charity. I know. Then why would you do it? Alexander smiled faintly. Maybe because I know what it feels like when life keeps adding problems faster than solutions. Emily frowned. You? Believe it or not, I was not born sitting behind a desk. The honesty in his voice softened something inside her. Still, she said quietly, that is a lot of money. Not compared to peace of mind. Emily did not know how to answer that. For several moments, neither spoke. Then a small voice appeared from the hallway. Mom. Ethan shuffled into the room carrying his stuffed dinosaur and rubbing sleepy eyes. Is that your friend? Emily smiled. It is. Ethan climbed onto the couch beside her. Hi, Mr. Alexander. Alexander's expression brightened instantly. Good evening, Ethan. Mom says somebody fixed our car. Emily laughed softly. Children had a way of ignoring complicated conversations and aiming directly at the truth. She did mention that. Ethan considered this seriously. Whoever did it is nice. Alexander looked toward the city lights beyond the glass. His voice lowered slightly. I think your mom is pretty nice too. Ethan nodded, as if confirming an obvious fact. She is. After the call ended that night, Emily sat quietly for a long time. The mystery was not entirely solved. Alexander had never actually admitted anything. Yet somehow she knew. More importantly, she understood something else. Beneath the humor, beneath the late-night conversations, beneath the careful way he avoided talking about himself, Alexander carried his own loneliness. And for the first time, Emily found herself wondering what kind of life could leave a man with everything still looking forward to a phone call every night. 3 nights later, a small envelope appeared on Alexander's desk. He almost missed it beneath a stack of reports waiting for his signature. The envelope was plain white, slightly bent at the corners, with his first name written across the front in large, uneven letters. Alexander frowned. Very few people mailed anything directly to his office. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper covered in oversized handwriting. Dear Mr. Alexander, thank you for helping my mom. She smiles more now. I like when she smiles. Thank you for talking to me about dinosaurs. My favorite is still Tyrannosaurus Rex. Mom says I should not bother you because you are busy, but I wanted to say thank you anyway. Your friend, Ethan Carter. Alexander read the letter once. Then again. Then a third time. Around him, the executive floor remained busy as assistants moved between offices and conference rooms. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Yet for several moments, the noise seemed to disappear completely. He lowered the paper slowly and stared out the window. Nobody had written him a letter in years. Real letters belonged to another time. Another life. A life before quarterly earnings, shareholder meetings, and endless responsibilities. Something tightened unexpectedly in his chest. Not pain. Something deeper. Something he had forgotten how to name. A knock interrupted the silence. His assistant stepped inside. The board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Alexander quickly folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I will be there shortly. She paused. Everything okay? Alexander looked toward the skyline. For the first time all morning, he smiled. Yes, better than okay. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table helping Ethan color pictures while spaghetti simmered on the stove. The apartment felt warmer lately. Not because anything had changed physically. The furniture was still old. The walls still needed paint. Bills still arrived with frustrating consistency. Yet somehow the atmosphere felt lighter. Hope had a way of changing a room. Her phone rang at exactly 11 o'clock. Hello. Alexander's voice sounded different. Softer somehow. Good evening, Emily. She immediately noticed the change. You sound happy. A brief laugh followed. Do I? Definitely. Ethan looked up from his coloring book. Is that Mr. Alexander? Emily nodded. He sounds happy too. Ethan announced loudly enough for the phone to pick up. Alexander laughed. Good observation, Ethan. Mom says I have excellent observation skills. Your mom is correct. Ethan seemed satisfied with this assessment and returned to his dinosaurs. Emily smiled. What happened today? Alexander walked slowly through his penthouse, one hand resting in his pocket where Ethan's letter remained folded. I received something unexpected. Good unexpected? Very. He paused briefly. When was the last time somebody thanked you for being yourself? Emily blinked. The question caught her off guard. Honestly. She thought for a moment. I cannot remember. Alexander nodded quietly. That is what I thought. Neither mentioned the letter directly. Neither needed to. The emotion behind it filled the silence between them. Later, after Ethan had gone to bed, the conversation deepened. The city slept around them while 2 lights remained on in 2 very different homes. Can I ask you something? Emily said. Of course. Why are you alone so much? Alexander stopped walking. Outside his windows, Chicago stretched endlessly beneath the night sky. Thousands of homes. Millions of people. Yet the question landed with surprising force. That is a complicated answer. Those are usually the interesting ones. He smiled faintly. Work became easier than relationships. Emily listened quietly. Work never leaves, he continued. It never changes its mind. It never disappoints you unexpectedly. But it also does not care about you. The response came instantly. Alexander froze. For a moment neither spoke. Emily had a habit of saying simple things that somehow carried enormous weight. Finally he exhaled. No, it does not. The silence that followed felt different than before. More vulnerable. More honest. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped sharing stories and started sharing pieces of themselves. And for the first time in years, Alexander found himself wondering whether success had cost him more than he had ever realized. The following Monday began like any other. Emily arrived at the diner before sunrise, tied on her apron, and prepared herself for another busy shift. Outside, autumn wind swept fallen leaves across the sidewalk while customers drifted in searching for coffee and warmth. Inside, the television mounted above the counter played a local business news program that nobody usually paid attention to. Emily certainly did not. She was carrying a tray of coffee mugs when a familiar voice suddenly drifted from the screen. Her steps slowed. Something about the voice felt impossible to ignore. She turned instinctively toward the television. The mug nearly slipped from her hands. There, standing behind a podium in a tailored navy suit, was a man she had never seen before and somehow recognized immediately. The calm voice. The measured way he spoke. The slight pause before answering questions. A banner appeared beneath the image. Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Technologies. Emily froze. The restaurant noise seemed to disappear around her. The reporter continued speaking. Reed Technologies had just announced a major expansion expected to create thousands of jobs across the Midwest. Cameras flashed. Executives surrounded him. Investors applauded. The man on the screen smiled politely as reporters called his name. Emily stared at the television in complete disbelief. CEO, not a technology employee, not a manager, not an office worker. Chief Executive Officer. One of the most recognizable business leaders in the country. Her pulse quickened. Memories rushed through her mind. Every late-night conversation. Every carefully avoided question. Every vague answer. Technology. He had always said technology. Technically true, yet not remotely the whole truth. Emily, her co-worker, asked, "Are you okay?" She barely heard her. Across the screen, Alexander was answering another question. Confident, composed, powerful. He looked completely different from the man she imagined during their calls. Not because his face surprised her, because his world did. That night, for the first time in weeks, Emily did not know what to feel. Ethan was asleep. The apartment was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. She sat on the couch staring at her phone. 11 o'clock came and went. Then 11:05. Finally the phone rang. Alexander. The familiar name appeared on the screen. Emily looked at it for several seconds before answering. "Hello." Her voice sounded different. Alexander noticed immediately. "Emily, you are a CEO." Silence filled the line, long enough to become an answer itself. Alexander slowly sat down in his office chair. The television interview. Of course. He should have expected this day. "I was going to tell you." Emily laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. When Alexander had no answer. She stared out the window at the rain-streaked city lights. "Do you have any idea how ridiculous this sounds?" "Probably. I thought you worked in technology." "I do. That is not the point." Alexander closed his eyes briefly. For the first time in months, he felt uncertain. Not about a business deal. Not about a negotiation. About a person. "I never wanted you to talk to me because of my title," he said quietly. Emily listened. "I wanted you to know me before you knew everything else." The honesty in his voice stopped her from responding immediately. Across the city, Alexander stood and walked toward the window overlooking Chicago. "Every person I meet knows who I am before they know who I am," he continued. "The company walks into the room before I do. The money walks into the room before I do. The headlines walk into the room before I do." Emily remained silent. "You were the first person in years who spoke to me like none of that mattered." The city lights reflected across the glass in front of him. "I was afraid if I told you too soon, everything would change." Emily looked down at the phone in her hand. The truth was, everything had changed. Yet somehow not in the way she expected. Because beneath the surprise, beneath the shock, one fact remained impossible to ignore. Every conversation had been real. Every laugh. Every late-night call. Every moment. Finally she asked the question that mattered most. Was any of it fake? Alexander answered without hesitation. Not a single second. And for the first time since seeing him on that television screen, Emily did not know whether that answer made things easier or infinitely more complicated. The next evening arrived with a strange mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. For the first time since their accidental connection began, neither Emily nor Alexander knew exactly where they stood. The phone call from the night before had ended politely, but questions lingered in the silence afterward. Emily spent the day replaying every conversation in her mind. The jokes, the late-night talks, the kindness. None of those things felt false. Yet learning who Alexander really was had shifted something. Not because of the money, not because of the success, because she suddenly understood how different their worlds truly were. That night, shortly before 11, a knock echoed through her apartment. Emily frowned. She was not expecting anyone. Ethan looked up from the living room floor where he was building a cardboard dinosaur habitat. "I will get it," he announced. "Absolutely not," Emily said, smiling as she stood. She crossed the apartment and opened the door. Then she froze. Standing in the hallway was Alexander Reed. No cameras. No security team. No expensive entourage. Just a tall man in a dark jacket holding a paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. For a moment neither spoke. Reality looked different than imagination, yet somehow familiar. Emily recognized the calm eyes immediately. Alexander looked exactly like the voice she had come to know. "Hello, Emily," he said softly. She stared at him in disbelief. "You are actually here." "I was nearby." He paused, then smiled. "That was a lie. I drove 40 minutes. Despite everything, Emily laughed. The tension cracked instantly. From inside the apartment, Ethan appeared. His eyes widened. "Mr. Alexander?" Alexander's smile grew. "Good evening, Ethan." The boy launched himself across the room and wrapped his arms around Alexander's waist before anyone could stop him. Alexander looked startled for half a second before carefully returning the hug. Emily watched the moment unfold. Something warm settled quietly inside her chest. Children had a remarkable ability to ignore complications and focus only on what mattered. 20 minutes later, The three of them sat around the small kitchen table eating cookies from the bakery box. The apartment felt impossibly small compared to the life Alexander came from, yet he seemed completely comfortable there. Eventually, Ethan disappeared into his room, leaving the two adults alone. A gentle silence settled between them. "I owe you an apology," Alexander said. Emily looked up. "For not telling me?" He nodded. "For being afraid to tell you." She studied him carefully. The confident executive she had seen on television was nowhere to be found. Sitting across from her was simply Alexander, the man who listened, the man who remembered details, the man who called every night. "You know what bothered me most?" she asked quietly. "What?" "Not that you are wealthy." Alexander waited. "It was realizing you thought I would care more about that than who you are." The words landed harder than she intended. Alexander lowered his eyes briefly. "Maybe I have spent too many years around people who did." Emily reached for her coffee mug. "That sounds lonely." A faint smile appeared on his face. It was. Silence returned. Comfortable this time. Honest. Finally, Alexander looked around the apartment. The worn furniture. The crayon drawings on the refrigerator. The small shoes by the door. The evidence of a real life being lived. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Emily nodded. "I spent years building a company." He glanced toward Ethan's room. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to build a life." Emily felt her throat tighten. Outside, city lights shimmered beyond the apartment windows. Inside, everything felt still, peaceful, real. "And then?" she asked softly. Alexander smiled. "Then somebody answered the wrong phone call." Emily laughed through the sudden sting in her eyes. Across the hall, Ethan's voice drifted from his bedroom. "Mom." "Yes." "Is Mr. Alexander staying for hot chocolate?" Alexander and Emily looked at each other. Then both laughed. The sound filled the small apartment with warmth. And in that moment, neither wealth nor hardship seemed to matter very much. Because sometimes life changes through grand plans. And sometimes it changes through a simple mistake, a late-night conversation, and the courage to answer a phone call. For the first time in years, Alexander no longer looked forward to hearing a voice through a phone. He looked forward to coming back. And for the first time in a very long time, Emily realized the future no longer felt quite so heavy. Somewhere between two different worlds, three lonely people had found something neither money nor luck could buy. They had found home.